Welcome to Module 5, Pitfalls and Challenges in Systems Change. Module 5 is the first of the 3 practice modules. These modules introduce useful approaches to and considerations when applying theory to practice. Module 5 presents some barriers practitioners have noted when they apply the systems approaches presented in Modules 1 through 4. These are presented in order to anticipate and mitigate the challenges, so they do not contribute to unnecessary delays in action or the application of these concepts. As a reminder, this toolkit is an effort to capture our learning from the early stage systems change initiative with the Fred Hollows Foundation. It's not an exhaustive presentation or exploration of the existing theories or concepts related to systems change, but an introduction to the prominent ones that informed our decision making and our application of these theories within the organization. It is hoped that making these underlying concepts explicit will be a first step towards a shared language and can be used to spark conversation for planning the ways forward. The goals for Module 5 are to begin our shift from exploring the theories around systems to the practice of systems change. Within this module, we will discuss selected challenges practitioners have faced when bridging systems theory to practice, and acknowledge this shared challenge and discuss potential mitigation strategies. One of the first and biggest challenges we may face as practitioners is taking the first step, especially in the context of complex systems where there isn't a right or correct choice, but there may be many effective options. The theory and frameworks presented in the previous modules emphasize the unknowability of complex system dynamics and the limitations of relying only on content experts or scientific experts to understand a much larger or complex system. This theory also turns many of the leadership skills that we commonly hold and may feel more comfortable with on their head. When we apply systems leadership, it requires a much more collaborative and humble approach than more traditional forms of leadership that have the authority and hierarchy supporting our ability to direct others. However, if we know there is an approach that can sustain improvements or changes within systems that are known to maintain health and equities, it is worth taking that first step. And in this module, we'll discuss some of the challenges that can be faced or the bumps on the road that we can prepare for so we're better able to respond ourselves and support others as they face similar challenges. There are many challenges of applying these approaches noted in the literature and from our experience in this early stage initiative. The first is that the volume of theories and concepts and approaches from various disciplines can be initially very confusing, can feel vague or overwhelming. In that, by nature of this approach, that all of the context is so relevant to finding the appropriate intervention, there isn't a handbook anywhere that can direct practitioners to know what they're doing is correct, that this is the first initiative that should be done, followed by this next one. There are many guidance and ways of thinking of the approach, but this can feel overwhelming to those that are new and trying to take that first step to be able to navigate all of this information for the first time. The second challenge is the maintaining of engagement over a very long term. So systems change is not something that happens in a 6-month period. Meaningful, transformative, and sustainable change will take a long time to see. And in the end, it won't be able to attribute this change to a single actor. And that lack of credit can also be challenging. Additionally, as described in the systems leadership, systems change, and complexity modules, that this type of action requires sustained collaboration across multiple stakeholders. Oftentimes, such as in this initiative, these stakeholders are voluntary in that they aren't required to collaborate. They aren't required to work with others in this way. And so there has to be additional ways of finding motivation to keep them engaged so that that long-term work can continue across various points of the system. And a third challenge that we particularly found within our work, as well as was noted in the literature, is that there can be some variations and nuance into what some of these terms mean. And there can be significant differences in what these terms mean to individuals. So across sectors and disciplines, systems change, systems leadership exists, and there can be some subtle differences. As the energy around this approach is growing, many people are discussing this approach. There are differences, however, and one of the authors within the literature suggests even the concept of systems change can be limited and confusing because systems by definition are always changing. So if we recall the description of complex adaptive systems is that they are adapting to the intervention, they're adapting to new information, they're growing. Even the actors within the system are growing and learning in an ongoing way. And so a system will always be changing. So it can be very easy to provide an intervention and see that there's a shift or a change and feel as though someone is doing systems change. However, this is very different from systems transformation, which means that an initiative or a change has occurred within the system and is integrated in the system in a way that when this one actor stops this one project, it doesn't mean that all of the services will stop, right? That it will continue without their ongoing action, that it's been integrated into the system at multiple points so that that change will continue and sustain. And so being able to test, is our intervention the only thing that's been impacted? And if we stop this project, will it completely stop being available to all of the individuals in the system? Or are we working on our partnerships and our collaboration so that if we lose funding or are unable to be participating for any reason, that that will not stop the availability of this service or this resource within the system, but that it will continue without us. There are many things that can be done to mitigate these challenges. One of them is the way we look at what needs to change. So when we're looking outward and trying to change a system, we also need to be looking inward and continuously find ways that we can evolve and grow and learn as leaders and as organizations. The development cannot be limited to changing those around us, but even in this initiative, there's been significant organizational change that's been necessary so that the policies, practices, processes, and mental models within the organization can sustainably support this approach. Because as I'm sure you can see now we've gotten to Module 5, these are very complicated. There are many parts to this shift, and a lot of it is a shift in how we even think or see the world around us. And that's not an easy change to do. In addition, how we relate to others, who we think needs to be at the table, requires a lot of shifts because it may take longer now to convene a meeting. It may be more difficult. We may have to travel slightly more to reach those that aren't able to attend a meeting in a main city, but that their perspective is still extremely valuable and necessary. And so we need to find new ways of engaging and recognizing what it is that we value and questioning, is that something we need to develop in this process as well? So it's not just a one direction change, it requires a lot of inward growth and development, which can be difficult. Second, developing and communicating a unifying vision is very important, particularly around the challenge of maintaining long term engagement and with multiple stakeholders that are voluntarily engaging in this project. And so knowing what is it we're working for? How do we celebrate small wins, such as the inclusion of a new perspective, the first step towards a new project, a new collaboration, a new way of considering what we're doing, the inclusion of a new sector, anything that could be different from what we've done before, and really celebrating that and being able to tie that into this larger goal that everyone is working towards is really important to continue that momentum. And then another way of mitigating some of these challenges is how we look at learning and the idea of failure. So we're looking to confirm that we're correct and that we're stepping out because we are certain that this is the right choice. That could make failure very embarrassing, very uncomfortable, because now we feel like we did something wrong, that we should have done something differently. This is very different than the approach in complexity. We have to be comfortable knowing that we are stepping out without all of the information and that we are actively seeking to gain more knowledge, to gain better understanding. And so having very open and transparent conversations around what did we learn, what was different from what we expected, is the application of this approach. It's not a revelation that we were somehow short sighted, but it's a recognition that we are applying the systems leadership approach to learning and being open to new information. And so it's a cultural shift around how do we view something that we might label as failure, or how do we view being open to learning so that we aren't kind of shifting towards a confirmation that our idea was right from the beginning, but we're always working to see, even if it was slightly different, if there was a slight modification, but that is a win. In addition to these mitigation strategies, there are particular systems thinking skills that can be developed by ourselves that will support us navigating these hiccups and these bumps that we face along the process. And this is a shift in the way that we think about how we define the problem, how we determine the aspects of the problem, and what level of detail to include, which can help us make those first steps and know when to take action, and how we represent our mental models, how we represent our models of our understanding of the system, and then how we test our models, test these hypotheses so we can feed back and continue to develop that understanding. And so there are systems thinking skills that Richmond presents in his article, which is included in the additional information slide. And it discusses how they differ from more traditional thinking approaches to problem solving. And many of the challenges that can be faced along the application of these theories in practice can be tied and be multiplied by using traditional thinking skills to address these complex problems. So the first variation is dynamic thinking versus static thinking. Dynamic thinking is looking at how problems and issues unfold over time as opposed to one-time occurrences or snapshots of data or assessment of behavior at one time. So this could include meetings or discussions where one data point is selected and used to inform significant interventions, where a question would ask, like, over what period of time was this pattern seen? Or what are additional data points that can be brought in so we can see this challenge more as an average over time, as something that is dynamic and is adjusting rather than one snapshot being able to represent a much larger issue. Another, when we're trying to decide what level of detail to include, is systems as cause thinking versus systems as effect thinking. Systems as cause thinking is more systems thinking aligned, and this is a process by which we determine what boundary to include, what aspects we might have some influence over, or different factors that could actually influence the health outcome. When we use systems as effect thinking, in opposite, this would be a more traditional approach. And so this may view a health outcome as something that's just driven or determined by external forces. And that can be overwhelming as the number of potential forces is so large, and we can become overwhelmed or frozen as we try to determine what to include. And this is something that comes up often as we think about complexity. We step back as practitioners and acknowledge that there is so much going on influencing health that then it's like, now what do we do? How do we move forward when there is this vast potential information and considerations? And so what we want to do is think more within our realm of influence as a place to start, is how can we start there as we, and then test as we learn more about how we can have an effect in the system. And in Richmond presents in his article a question as he helps to develop the systems as cause thinking. And so rather than discussing health behaviors or outcomes, or just outcomes as something that they did or something that's their fault of the system, you want to ask, how could we have been responsible? And now we can start to see our role as actors within the system as something that we could potentially do. Asking, how did we make ourselves vulnerable to these forces that we could not control? So even if it's outside of our control, what are things that we can do to maybe mitigate or to prepare for a factor in the future? So it starts to identify these different causes that we can have more agency within. Another thinking difference that also influences this determining aspects of the problem is forest thinking. So forest thinking allows us to do that step back and think about how all of the factors are working together versus the opposite, which might be thought of as tree by tree thinking. In the tree by tree thinking, we get really caught up in the details and the specifics of one interaction, one event. Forest thinking brings us back to bring those multiple data points to have an average of how is the system functioning on average. So then we can make these steps and we're not reacting to isolated issues and symptoms, right? We want to move away from that reactive problem solving. Next, when we think about how we represent mental models, there's operational thinking, which is a systems thinking skill as well. Operational thinking aims to understand how a behavior is generated by various factors. So we're looking for the dynamics at play versus simply describing factors that correlate with an outcome. And this is the traditional thinking skill of correlational thinking or factors thinking. And so as we're looking at what are the dynamics, what are the specific mechanisms by which one factor influences a behavior or a health outcome, this is more helpful than if we're just looking at a list of these multiple factors correlate with a health outcome and then trying to pick a factor to intervene on. And so this could be really well supported by that systems dynamics tool of figuring out what is the mechanism by which these factors are related, rather than just noting that these factors are correlated with the outcome. Because then we can know in what way, how can we intervene, how do we want to influence or change them. Another one also related to systems dynamics is closed loop thinking versus straight line thinking. So we've talked about this a lot in the other modules as well. The more traditional linear thinking, we do A, B will occur, and then we'll have this outcome and we're kind of done. We measure at the end, versus closed loop thinking, which now looks at how does that end result feed back into the initiating aspect. So in the systems dynamic module, we talked about how people that may get glasses, have corrected vision, can move to this outcome where now they have quality vision, but over time their vision may get worse and now they've moved back. So now we've closed the loop and we've gotten a more complete picture of how people are moving throughout a system. And we've identified opportunities to intervene in order to sustain improvements. The last one that influences how we represent and describe our mental models is quantitative thinking versus measurement thinking. And so the traditional measurement thinking approach is that really emphasizes and prioritizes those things that can be measured, that can be counted, that are really easy to include in evaluation. And this is a sticking point in this project too, is how do we evaluate these kinds of initiatives. But what we want to do within systems thinking that can help us get through this challenge and this barrier is to engage quantitative thinking. So rather than identifying things that can be measured, like the number of surgeries, number of glasses distributed, number of people with this disease or illness, we want to also look at those factors that are a little harder to measure, but that can be quantified. And so factors such as awareness. Awareness came up often in this project as something that was needed, both awareness within communities of what eye health is, what options are, what risks are, how to protect vision, as well as among practitioners and policymakers around the importance of eye health and the factors and influences that it has on other outcomes such as labor, productivity at work, things like that. And so with quantitative thinking, we want to figure out how can that be quantified? Is there a Likert scale that we could look at from zero awareness across these various domains up to awareness of 10, full awareness, across identified domains, but looking at what are ways that we can quantify it so that we can start to measure, we can start to incorporate that in our understanding about why the outcomes are the way they are and where we can intervene effectively. And the last of the systems thinking and critical thinking differences that Richmond discusses is a way to support how we test our models. And this is scientific thinking versus proving truth thinking. And so rather than trying to validate or confirm our models, our mental models, our understandings of the system, what we want to do in order to really move forward in this approach, these attempts, is to use more of a scientific thinking approach where we're having an hypothesis that we're truly testing so that we can gain more information. And we want to capture reality. We want to understand why the model didn't work so that we can identify new ways, maybe new factors we hadn't considered, new leverage points that maybe will be more powerful. So maybe if we do an intervention and the outcome is much larger than we expected from what we did, that may highlight a really powerful leverage point, something that we want to intervene in differently or again, because maybe a smaller investment can have a really significant outcome. And so it's going into the testing of our models in a way that is open to getting new information, open to being surprised, so that we can take that information rather than feeling that if we don't prove or validate our model that we did something wrong. It's a really important difference, and having that confidence to kind of put together a model, step forward, test it, and incorporate new information can really help move through some of these barriers to using these theories in practice. For more examples of practitioners applying these theories, you can have more information here, as well as the Richmond article, which really goes in more deeply into these different ways of thinking and applying systems thinking skills in practice. Up next is Module 6, Program Planning. In this module, we will review characteristics of complex systems and systems thinking that present a challenge for traditional approaches to program planning. We will also present alternative ways of approaching program planning that better align with what we know about complex public health challenges.